Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're diving deep into a case that honestly feels like it's ripped from some kind of high-stakes thriller. It spans continents. It's captivated headlines. We're talking about the complex saga of Vijay Mallya.
It really is a multifaceted story. You've got alleged financial misconduct tangled up with these incredibly intricate legal processes, and then there's the high-stakes international diplomacy layered on top.
Right.
What stands out to me really from the start is how it just perfectly exemplifies the challenges of, global financial accountability.
Absolutely. So our mission here in this deep dive is to try and untangle this really intricate web. The allegations, the court cases, the diplomatic back and forth surrounding the Vijay Mallya. We want to cut through the noise, give you a clear picture of the key events and where things actually stand today, drawing straight from all the source material you've shared with us. Okay, so imagine this. A high-flying airline, Kingfisher, once like the absolute epitome of luxury travel in India. Suddenly it just plummets. That's Kingfisher Airlines back in 2012. And its spectacular crash, burdened by almost 9,000 crore in debt, which is, about 977 million? That was really just the fuse being lit on an even bigger scandal.
And that wasn't a small amount, even for an airline. It was borrowed from a whole group of banks, 17 of them, I think.
Yeah, a consortium with SBI leading the charge. So what happens next? Well, by 2015, the CBI, that's India's Central Bureau of Investigation, they opened an FIR, that's a first information report, accusing Mallya directly of cheating, fraud, and conspiracy. And the Enforcement Directorate, the ED, they didn't hold back either. They alleged he diverted massive chunks of that borrowed money.
Right, and they pointed fingers at specific places.
Exactly. We're talking alleged destinations like foreign assets, his Formula One team, Force India, the IPL, the Indian Premier League, and even, personal luxury items. The methods they alleged, things like over-invoicing, pretty sophisticated money laundering.
From a strategic viewpoint, what makes this more than just a business going bust is that the alleged methods they talked about, especially that over-invoicing, that wasn't just about hiding money. It kind of became a template almost for how other big fraud cases in India were then pursued. It really set a precedent for this aggressive asset tracing that wasn't so common before. It totally changed the scope of these kinds of investigations.
Okay, so as the legal net is tightening back in India, Mallya makes his move. A pretty swift departure to the UK, March 3rd, 2016. And that effectively kicks off what becomes this, unprecedented international chase.
His passport gets revoked pretty quickly after that.
Right. And India officially sends an extradition request over to the UK in February 2017. He gets arrested by Scotland Yard April 18th, 2017, but then he's released on bail.
Okay.
A really pivotal moment comes December 10th, 2018. A UK magistrate rules there's a case to answer. They even noted Mallya had, quote, charmed the bankers and misused the loans.
Charmed the bankers. Interesting phrasing.
Isn't it? Then, February 2019, the UK Home Secretary signs off, approves his extradition. And by April 2020, the UK High Court dismisses his appeal. He's barred from going to the Supreme Court because the time limit ran out.
So legally, it looks like game over for appeals in the UK at that point.
You'd think so.
Yeah.
But then, surprisingly, from November 2020 onwards, the UK government starts citing this confidential legal proceeding. And that's the reason they give for the delay continuing, still today.
And this confidential status, it's not just, keeping things secret. It often points to a really critical element in extradition law. It could involve a privacy claim, maybe even a human rights challenge by Mallya himself.
Okay.
And those things can significantly complicate and really drag out these processes. This is where the real legal chess game happens, often totally out of public view.
So are these kinds of confidential challenges, are they common in these big high-profile extradition cases?
Yeah.
And what makes Mallya's situation so sticky, I guess, that it's still holding things up years later?
They are pretty common in complex, high-stakes cases, yeah? Especially when the person involved has the money, the resources to mount these really extensive legal defenses.
Right.
What makes Mallya's case particularly sticky is just the sheer length of time it's taking and the lack of transparency around what this confidential challenge actually is. Even after the UK courts seem to have cleared the decks for extradition, it leaves a lot of room for speculation, about what exactly is stopping that final step.
Okay, so meanwhile, it wasn't just about getting him back to India, right? Back home, the authorities were already going full tilt, scrambling to claw back every rupee they could of the alleged funds and assets.
The recovery effort.
Exactly. The ED seized assets they valued at over 12,000 crore. Now, to give you some concrete examples from the sources, this included his Kingfisher Towers penthouse in Bengaluru, and also a London property that was financed by UBS Bank. Interestingly, that London home, it was owned through trusts. And while UBS did go after it initially, they actually settled the mortgage terms later on.
Okay, so that one got resolved, sort of.
Sort of. But that £15 million White House-style penthouse,
Yeah.
the Sky Mansion on top of Kingfisher Towers, that remains unfinished and stuck in legal limbo. But here's another really fascinating twist in this whole thing.
Go on.
Mallya has his own pretty compelling claims about how much money has been recovered. He actually asserts that the banks have recovered 14,131.6 crore.
Wait, say that again, 14,000 crore?
Yep, 14,131.6 crore. And he claims that's over double the 6,203 crore that was originally sort of adjudicated as the principal and interest. And he's actively pushing the Indian courts now for, like, lawful justification for this recovery figure. He wants proof.
Wow. Okay, that financial discrepancy claim, that's actually a really fascinating legal strategy from Mallya's side. By claiming over-recovery, he's effectively trying to flip the script, isn't he?
Seems like it.
He's challenging the competence of the banks themselves and sort of subtly shifting the burden of proof back onto them to justify the amounts. It's a common tactic, frankly, to prolong these high-stakes battles. And it just introduces a whole new layer of complexity to the asset recovery process itself.
Right. And beyond the courtrooms, this case has this huge political and diplomatic angle, too. India has been incredibly consistent, putting pressure on the UK.
Relentless, really.
Yeah. Prime Minister Modi has repeatedly brought it up with UK leaders, including the current PM Keir Starmer, G20 summits, various bilateral meetings. The aim is always crystal clear. Speed up Mallya's extradition and others like Nirav Modi, too.
The economic fugitives list.
Exactly. Now, on the UK side, their position is, well, British ministers keep saying they're committed to not becoming a haven for economic offenders, but
There's always a but.
There's always a but. They consistently say the timing of any extradition depends entirely on resolving those confidential legal matters we talked about earlier.
And this really highlights a broader trend we see in international relations. It's this very delicate dance, isn't it, between a nation's own sovereign legal processes, their rules, and the intense diplomatic pressure coming from another country that's seeking justice.
Yeah.
The fact that these discussions are so sustained year after year also signals India's unwavering commitment. They are determined to pursue these alleged economic offenders. It makes this whole thing a massive test case for international cooperation on financial crime.
Okay, now let's shine a light on a specific and pretty significant legal development from India, something you can't really escape even from London. Back in 2022, India's Supreme Court convicted him for contempt of court.
Ah, yes, the contempt charge.
The reason? He had transferred U.S. $40 million to his children. And this was in direct violation of explicit previous court orders telling him not to move assets.
A clear breach.
So the sentence handed down was 4 months in jail and a, frankly, fairly small euro to 2,000 fine, but also, crucially, a directive to repay that $40 million plus 8% interest.
What truly stands out there, I think, is how, even though he's physically absent from India, the Indian judiciary just keeps going. They continue to pursue the case and deliver verdicts against him.
Right. It's not just on pause.
No, it sends this really powerful message about the enforceability of their legal system, even for people who fled the country. And this specific contempt conviction, it creates a very practical problem for Mallya. It's a specific, actionable jail sentence just waiting for him if he ever sets foot back in India.
Okay, so bringing all these threads together, where does this leave us today, June 2025?
Well, Mallya has kind of reemerged in public discourse recently. He actually gave an interview on a podcast just this month, June 2025.
No, interesting. What did he say?
Well, he described India's business climate as bureaucratically stifling. He apologized to former Kingfisher staff, which was notable. He cited the 2008 financial crisis as a big factor in the airline's failure. And crucially, he repeated his claim that he's effectively repaid 14,000 crore out of the original 6,200 crore borrowed.
Doubling down on the over-recovery claim. Exactly. He also said he'd be willing to return to India, but only if he was assured a fair trial. Meanwhile, his legal battle in India continues. He's fighting those recovery details in the courts through a petition in the Karnataka High Court, still arguing the banks have gathered twice the debt and demanding they show the paperwork for their claims.
Still fighting on that front.
Still fighting. And on the diplomatic front, just recently at the 2025 G20 summit, PM Modi apparently raised both Malya's and Nirav Modi's cases, again with PM Starmer, just signaling, this remains a top priority for India.
No letting up.
Seems not. As for what's next? Well, the sources are pretty clear. The extradition still hinges entirely on resolving that hidden or confidential legal issue in the UK, and there's just no public timeline for when that might happen.
The $1 million or perhaps $1 billion question?
Pretty much. Mallya keeps contesting the repayment details in India, vowing to seek legal relief if he can prove he's overpaid. And of course, that contempt sentence from the Indian Supreme Court. Still hanging over him, fully enforceable.
If we broaden the view a bit, the Vijay Mallya case really remains this incredibly complex legal and diplomatic, Gordian knot feels like the right term.
Yeah.
Despite him popping back up in public discourse recently, it just doesn't look like there's any clear, immediate end in sight. There are just too many legal and diplomatic threads still completely unresolved. His public statements now are likely, part of a wider legal and PR strategy, trying to control the narrative while all these various appeals and challenges slowly play out behind the scenes.
Yeah, this deep dive has really shown us, hasn't it? The Vijay Mallya case is just this sprawling saga, alleged fraud, cross-border asset recovery efforts, this constant diplomatic tug-of-war, and just persistent legal wrangling that seems to almost defy any kind of simple resolution.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? In this increasingly interconnected global economy we live in, how do countries actually balance their own legal sovereignty, their own due process, with this global push for justice when it comes to alleged financial crimes, especially when the individuals involved have the kind of resources Mallya does to exploit every single legal avenue available, often across multiple countries?
That is a profound question, and it's one that definitely continues to shape international legal and diplomatic relations today. The Mallya case really reminds us that justice, especially when it crosses borders, is rarely, if ever, just a straight line.